Go ahead.
Oh.
This is second forward.
Yeah. Hello, I'm T. Yomi Obidi, and this is episode 4 of our series, The Airplane and the Skies.
Stand by. You know that was just for me, right? That's
Yeah.
not live.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so stand by. Smiling at the camera. Looking up at the camera. Smiling and
Hello, welcome again to our series, The Airplane and the Skies. We have covered 3 episodes now, and I do hope next time you see an airplane up in the skies, instead of, oh, say hello to my mother and my father for me, which we used to do when we were little, you can look at it now and say, that's the tail. Which way is it turning? So if this turns this way, this is the way the aircraft is going to go. You can reach it with an advancement of approach, and share this with the children, share this with the nieces and the nephews. It makes us more enlightened in it, and hopefully very soon we're designers of some of these devices. That is the goal here. And I'm sure that we can achieve it, and we will achieve it. Today, we are looking at episode 4, which is the cockpit and avionics. The cockpit and avionics. Well, you know, let's go back to 1903, 1902, 1901, 1905, around the time the experiments on aviation was very hot, and the Wright brothers came up with their airplane. There was no cockpit avionics. You fly by wire, you look in the sky, you look at the ground while you're still flying, and you just hope you land where you target to land. We still do it to a little extent. It's called visual flying. And what's common these days is instrument flying. You don't even have to see anywhere. The instrument take care of everything. And there's been so much advancement in avionics and electronics and in the devices to help us become better pilots and become safer in the air. A little bit unfortunate, quite a good number of these discoveries came at the time of war. It was some countries trying to develop their vehicles so that it can provide visibility, it can be improved on avionics, so it can be better than the other person and so on, so that they can easily bomb the other person when the other person isn't watching. Isn't it ironical? But something good has come out of it, so unfortunate as that was, I guess there's some consolation that it was not all for naught. We have some discoveries coming from them, but that's no reason to look for war. You know, we need peace. Okay, all right. Take a look at this little portion in the graphics that show the aircraft, the landing gear. We have a portion there that is just the cockpit, and it has all these control devices there. Quite a lot of them. One thing that's very common with the airplane is there's a lot of redundancy. There's a lot of redundancy. You don't have that in any other vehicle as you have in the airplane. It's because anything can fail anytime, even after all has been done. No, the Titanic is not an airplane, but the engineer was so confident that he said, even God cannot sink this ship. That was reaching too far, obviously, and the ship did sink, unfortunately. But you can't design too confidently, too sure. So what the aeronautics industry has done is provide a lot of redundancies. There's at least a redundancy for every device that performs a particular operation in the aircraft. And a lot of those devices are usually controlled from the cockpit. In the bigger aircraft, they are called the control center. Penny has been an ardent follower of Starship Enterprise. There is one thing they call the flight deck, the control center. That's essentially what the cockpit has become these days. It's become the flight deck, the control center of the airplane. And it might as well be, because we have airplanes carrying 400, 500 people in one ship, the airplane. It's become more or less an airship. And so the ways to keep control of just about everything in the airplane at the touch of the button of the pilot and the co-pilot is done in that room, the cockpit, the flight deck, the control center. As of course, you will see, if you look progressively at airplanes from the beginning, you will see the advancement of those features, and it's amazing how far we have come from the very first airplanes. And we'll look into these when we come back.
Give me a hand clap. All right, smiling. Stand by. Looking at the camera.
So we look at the cockpit. This is displayed, generally bright light. It's brightly displayed, and it needs to be so. So lighting is also a feature of the cockpit design. Lighting, the different light colors, because they have to be readily visible no matter what the weather is in the sky, so that the pilot and the co-pilot can see clearly on the gadgets or the control switch that they want to press, and the sensor that they need to see the operation of, and hopefully do the right thing. They have the lives of hundreds and hundreds of passengers in their hands when they are flying. So the least that can be done is make their job easy to the extent that's possible. And one of those such things that can be done in the function of engineering is adequate lighting for the different instruments that they will need to operate. Well, let's start with the cockpit enclosure itself. The cockpit enclosure itself has seats where the pilot sits, and the co-pilot might sit for hours on end. So this needs to be ergonomically designed for comfort in long flights, so that the pilot, the co-pilot are not just drowsed in their flight. They need to stay alert. So a lot of thought, a lot of engineering, a lot of biological data has to be given to the designers of the seats, so that they're adequately ergonomically designed especially for long flights. Okay? There's also the jump seat. It's called a jump seat. It's for observers or invitees. It's the additional seat, usually in the middle, that allows occasionally an invitee or a third person or just a pilot who is returning home and just catching a ride with the plane that's going that way is sometimes, as a matter of courtesy, allowed to sit there with the pilot and the co-pilot. That's called the jump seat. The jump seat is not as comfortable as the others, but it too has these things put in them, the control devices and the various parts of the design of the cockpit. Then there's the instrument panel. The instrument panel itself, the console, it consists of essentially the tools that the pilot needs to control the aircraft, and some of those. Please cut. Cut.
Cut.
Yeah.
Stand by. Give me a clap. Whenever you're ready.
A typical display in the cockpit, as we've said, the instrument panels, the overhead panels, those are main things, the instrument panels, the overhead panels. The instrument panel has the main displays right in front of the pilot. Okay? This has to be designed intricately. It has to be designed in a kinetic way, that is biologically kinetic, to fit ergonomically, and so make the pilot perform their function, the pilot and the co-pilot perform their functions with minimal stress, at least from that aspect. Just flying has its own stress because of the concentration that's needed. So this has been done in modern airplanes. They taking all this into account and designing for comfort of the cockpit, of the avionics in the cockpit. So there's the main display, which is right in front of the pilot. It holds most important flight displays regarding flight performance and the status of the aircraft, because these are things that the pilot needs to keep constantly observing. After that, there's the overhead panel. After the instrument panel, there is the overhead panel, and the overhead panel essentially contains features and controls supportive to flight comfort. So things like the air conditioning, the cabin pressurization, those details. So you see the order of importance. The critical parameters for flight, they are in the main displays right in front of the pilot, okay? And they hold in most important flight information to be displayed right in front of the pilot as the pilot performs their duties, so they can see the immediate status of the aircraft, so they can respond immediately. Following that, in the order of importance, is the comfort. One, the function, the primary function, and two, the comfort. And the display for that is found in the overhead panel. So that contains features and controls that are supportive to flight comfort, the air conditioning, the comfort in the airplane, the cabin pressurization, and such things. And those are the primary things that are covered in the control panel of the aircraft. Then there's the number of instrument devices, depending on what kind of aircraft the pilot is flying. But these are the main ones. In addition, you have some other devices. You have, for example, the typical displays in the cockpit that have side consoles, and we'll talk a little bit more about those side consoles. We'll come back.
Give me a clap. Okay, looking at the camera, smiling.
All right, let's pick up on the other few control devices, few avionics, the devices that are found in the cockpit. that are made readily available to the pilot, so the pilot can make intelligent decisions on the fly if necessary. We've talked about the primary console that contains critical information that are right in front of the pilot, and we've talked about the one that's above. The pilot has to look up a bit, make a little effort to get to those that provide comfort, like the air conditioning, the pressure cabin, the cabin in the pressure in the cockpit, and in the fuselage at large, especially for the pilots, for the passengers in the aircraft. Then we have some side consoles. Typical display items in the cockpit include side consoles. The side consoles are generally for the placement of side stick and communication instruments. So some instruments that are necessary for communication, in addition to their primary tools. So you have those they are placed on the side stick. And they have importance, but they you can see the order of importance as it decreases, not unimportant, not redundant necessarily, but the order of importance as it decreases, the pilot needs to make more effort in reaching them. The first one was right in front of him. The pilot, him or her, cannot do, has no choice but see the control devices that are necessary for quick action, and then comfort, that's up above. It's not all the same in all aircraft, but there's general convention, and it's more or less that way. Then you have side consoles for the placement of the side stick, and you have the control column. The yoke controls in the pitch and the rudder pedals. Remember we talked about the pitch when we were talking about tail assembly and the rudder for controlling the yaw. So these are other control devices that are available that are present there in the cockpit. The yoke controls the pitch. That's the nosing up or the nosing down. That's the pitch of the aircraft. You just want to do it properly, adequately. If it noses up too much, it would stall. And if the stall is not controlled, it will spin. God have mercy if you get into a spin. You don't want that. So it's necessary to be able to control the pitch adequately. And that's one of the controls available to the pilot. And the pitch is controlled by the yoke. It's called the yoke. The yoke is essentially like the steering column. Instead of the steering column, which we have being round, this one is not round. It's just in form of U, and then it's not a complete circle. And you hold it like this. If you pull it to you, that means you're nosing up. If you push it down, it means you're nosing down. Then these are how you control the pitch of the aircraft. The other one is the rudder pedal. Again, remember the rudder? The rudder is for the yaw. So when the pilot presses the rudder on one side, the airplane turns to that side, and presses it on the other side, it turns to the other side. So exclusive pressing of the yaw rudder, means the pilot is not doing a banking turn. That's shown only for the purpose of education. When you turn, you do a banking turn. That's a proper turn. But to see the function of the rudder, just press it one way or the other. The airplane does something like this, complete yawing in the sky. And that control is made available to the pilot through the pedals. So he's got the stick to control the yoke, and he's got the pedals to control the yaw. then that is controlled through the rudder of the airplane. These are just some of the controls that are present in the cockpit or the flight deck, depending on how sophisticated the cockpit is. Some cockpits actually have entertainment center there that provides some immediate things that they want: coffee, comfort devices. There. And that's why in Starship Enterprise, the cockpit is essentially called the flight deck. The flight deck, the center for executive action. The cockpit is very important. The comfort of the controllers in the cockpit, which are the captain and the captain, the pilot, the primary pilot, and the co-pilot. Their comfort is critical to the comfort of everybody in the airplane, because it's when they are comfortable that they can adequately steer the airplane to safety, which is the exclusive, ultimate thing we seek when we fly in the sky: safe flight, safe landing. So it's necessary to make those who control this gigantic instrument, gigantic device in the sky, from takeoff to landing, it's important to make them comfortable so that they can do their proper job in making us hopefully land safely. And I desire and pray for hope for safe landing for us all as we go in the skies. But next time you get into an airplane, think of all this: the yoke, the rudder. These days they don't let people near the cockpit anymore because of some unfortunate situations that have happened in the war scenery. But long ago, in the 70s, in the 80s, used to get into the airplane and stop by the pilot at the cockpit and ask questions, and they show you a number of those things. Whenever you get such opportunity, or you get a chance to take students to the airport and look at these things, you should do that and look at them. They are very fascinating, but you get a chance to know the functions of each of these things.
Okay, give me a slate. Segment 5. Right. Well, yeah.
Okay.
Give me a slate.
Yes.
This is
segment 5. This is episode 5 of our series, The Airplane and the Skies.
fuselage.
And in this series, we'll be talking about the fuselage.
All right, good. All right, now give me a clap. Okay, stand by. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
Smiling at the camera.
Hello, and welcome to this episode in our series, The Airplane and the Skies. This is episode 5, The Fuselage. I'm Obidi. We have talked about many parts of the airplane. This is a very critical part. The airplane can fly and go here and go there, all that is great. But is it going to carry somebody? Yes. Where does it put them? In the fuselage. This is where you and I sit. By the way, we just finished the cockpit, right? The cockpit is part of the fuselage, but it's a special part, and that's why we treated that specially, because it has the control devices and such things as are needed to execute the flight. But the cockpit is the front part, the frontmost part of the fuselage. So the fuselage is this cigar-shaped thing that goes from this tip to this tail. And the fuselage essentially takes a shape like that. It's called the cigar-shaped, and like that. And as you can see, the nose is relatively small, and it rises up to the body, and it then takes a smaller shape again. It's an aerodynamic shape. It's an aerodynamic capsule, and that shape is necessary. In fact, in the airship and the dirigibles, they made them like that because it's long been known that the drag on a surface is reduced substantially when it has that shape. Again, the teardrop shape. Okay, so that is the shape of our fuselage. And there are appendages added to it: the landing gear, the fuel tank on the wing, which has its effect on the flow reaching or coming from the fuselage and all those things. But the fuselage, exclusive on its own, is a tear-shaped, teardrop shape, and it has the necessary aerodynamic shape for reduction of drag in flight. So let's look at the fuselage in greater detail. The airfoil shape, again, of the fuselage. You would have noticed that all the things, all the big bodies, big components we talk about, all have the airfoil shape. All have the airfoil shape. It's kind of round, bulky in the front, and it trims down to a narrow end, almost to a point in the end. And these are necessary shapes. So all devices that go forward have that shape in the front and narrow down to a slim and narrow end. And this allows the air to flow. The air is the fluid that's present in the flight of these vehicles, at least as long as we're in the troposphere. When we're not in the realm of space shuttles that do not use air, because there's no air in the environment they're flying. We'll get to that, but as long as we're in this realm, in the troposphere, and even a little bit in the stratosphere, the lower stratosphere, this is the case. The air is needed to be able to, one, have create less drag, create less opposition, and increase the motion. And so we have the fuselage, as we had the wing, as we have the tail actually designed, so that the leading edge is the nose, the front portion. The leading edge gradually rises from a point, more or less, to a bigger area, and then descends to a smaller area in the end, in the airfoil shape. So this is the shape of our fuselage, and it's the shape of our fuselages, essentially. They're not all round. Some of them are kind of wide, angular body, but they're generally typically narrowed bodies, and with increasing, all of them, increasing wide bodies as you go to the middle, because that's essentially the passenger space. And it's in the fuselage that you have the passenger seat. It's the fuselage that contains the kitchen for the passenger aircraft, where they serve you lunch. The fuselage contains the lavatory, the luggage. It's the fuselage that has the landing gear, at least the nose gear. So there's a lot of material, there's a lot of instruments present in the fuselage. The fuselages are classified according to a number of things. One of the classification methods is the wing attachments to the bulkheads in the fuselage. If the wing is attached at the high end, you say it's a fuselage with a high wing, and because of that, there's some alteration to the smoothness of the design there. Then there's the mid-wing, and there's the low-wing attachments to the fuselage. These are all considered in defining the fuselage and in strengthening different parts of the fuselage.
Give me a clap. Smiling at the camera.
Let's get back to the fuselage and talk a little bit about the high wing, mid wing, low wing attachment to the fuselage. We have talked about wings, but as you know, the wing finds its place on the fuselage. So it's probably not possible to talk about the wing without talking about the fuselage, or talk about the fuselage without talking about the wing. These are interconnected. So I want to address a couple of things in the high wing, mid wing, and low wing aircraft. I want to address this to the extent that they concern the fuselage, that they relate to the fuselage. You could have a wing on the aircraft go straight across. The distance from tip to tip of the wing is called the span of the wing. Half that distance is called the semi-span of the wing. Okay? The span of the wing, or the semi-span of the wing, semi-span is just half a span of the wing. Now, that would usually happen in older, smaller airplanes where the wing is just straight rectangular through at the top. But in modern sophisticated aircraft, you have the two wings, the semi-span of the wing, attached actually to the wing, not passing through as one piece, but you have each half attached to the wing. And they are usually attached in what's called a semi-monocoque attachment, semi-monocoque attachment to the wing. You actually have that in car bodies these days, a semi-monocoque design, but you have that. And at the portion that the wing is attached to the fuselage, you have what's called a bulkhead there. That portion has to be reinforced. Sometimes it's strong enough that it just goes and penetrates into a portion of the bulkhead and is built strongly with it. And sometimes there's additional string, metal, steel string, of course, with tension devices attached to the body of the airplane from the wing. And this is usually so when you have the low wing aircraft. So if you have the low wing aircraft and it's attached, it will be attached to the bottom of the airplane, and there's usually a string. This is very common in general aviation, smaller general aviation aircraft. You would have the string, tension string, metal, steel string, steel pieces attached to the body of the aircraft, and the other end to the wing, for usually again for the airplanes that have the wings on the bottom of the fuselage. That's on the low end of the fuselage. In the mid-wing aircraft, they stick right to the middle, and so that portion of the fuselage has to be really strengthened to hold the wing. Again, the semi-monocoque attached device. It is called a semi-monocoque design, and that area is strengthened because it has to be able to hold the wing adequately in its flight and allow for flexural motion of the wing also. Then you have the high wing aircraft. The largest aircraft that we have right now, the Antonov, is a high wing aircraft. And can you guess why it would be high wing and not low wing? Well, the Antonov, quite a massive aircraft, the largest, has very large wings. And you know, with all cantilever designs, if you keep stretching, if you hold a piece, a long piece, no matter how much you want to keep it flat, except you have some other device that keeps it straight at a particular height. Otherwise, if you're just holding this end, the longer the piece, the more it's going to dangle to the ground. So you have this. My hand can't be long forever, but it's this long, so it can do this. But if it was longer, at this end, it won't be this height anymore. It will start to do this. When it's longer, it does this. Longer still, it does this. So you end up having something like this. No matter how much you try, when it's very long, it does that. And if you see the Antonov or very large wings, you will see that towards the end, towards the tip of the wings, the portion with the fuselage is called the root, and the portion that's furthest away from the fuselage is called the tip. The tip has a lower height than the root. So if you're going to have an aircraft with such large wings, it makes sense that they are high wings, so that by the time you get to the tip, there's still some distance from the ground, which is generally about at least 3 feet or so, 3 to 6 feet from the ground. And that's one practical reason why the Antonov has a high wing in the design. But you see the interaction between the wings and the fuselage, and these different paraphernalia as they merge into the composite that's called the airplane. There is a requirement for each portion so that the whole entity can function adequately as it's desired to, and we have a complete airplane that's functional, that's reliable in the end. But this is an aspect of the fuselage. We'll continue with treating the fuselage when we come back.
Give me a clap. Smiling.
Okay, we've talked about high wing attachment to the fuselage, mid-wing attachment to the fuselage, and low wing attachment to the fuselage. Those are the possible attachments that we can have on the fuselage. The one that goes all the way across from span to span, we still call it the high wing to attachment to the fuselage. Although there are some high wing attached so that they're actually resting on the fuselage, and you don't have to worry too much about the point of attachment, because they're resting on the fuselage and they are attached by some external device, but those are not generally common. So we have 3 different ways where we can have the attachment to the fuselage for these wings. In either of them, especially in the mid-wing and the low-wing attachment, we necessarily have to design for structural integrity and for in the attachment of the wing to the fuselage. Just as we have to design for structural integrity in the attachment of the wing, we have to do the same in the attachment of the tail. The tail is as significant as the wing. In fact, you could argue that it's more significant when you consider that that's the control surface for the aircraft. But it's as important as the wing. It does not have the massive area that we have in the wing. But it's also very important because it's towards the tail that there's less material for the wing, and there's less material for the fuselage. So the design of these attachment devices has to be carefully done. There isn't as much architectural space in the tail attachment design as there would have been, as there is in the wing attachment design. So we need to pay attention to this critically. For the traditional tail, we want to design in the bottom portion of the wing, so it's very strong, and you know it's in the bottom portion of the wing attachment to the tail. That's the last portion of the aircraft that we are having the vertical tail and the horizontal tail. So it's very important that that area is reinforced so it doesn't collapse, so it doesn't fail, because there are control devices attached to it. And these control devices are massive. So just the tail portion has to be designed with adequate structural integrity in mind. And also in some of them, you actually have the expulsion of some gases. So you have to consider structural integrity from a thermal point of view and from a structural point of view in the design. Again, for vertical tail, it has to be able to withstand the mass of the tail assembly, because it's the vertical tail that controls the yaw, and you can't have a collapse on the fuselage. They are all built on the fuselage, so we have to have those portions of the fuselage, that portion that carries these things, to be adequately strong and to be exceptionally reinforced to take these control devices. The same is true for the V-tail concern for the different components of them, and the strengthening of those components so that they can take the necessary attachment, whether it's V-tail or vertical tail or the traditional tail that we have for them. So this is where the fuselage again becomes critically important when you consider its interaction with the tail. Of course, it's got an interaction with the passengers. Passengers go and come. Usually there's no exceptional outrageous performance like a jumping jack in the airplane, but you never know. So you don't just design for weight and balance, you design for impact too. If you want to design a chair for somebody to sit down, a person that's probably say 80 kilograms is different from if you design it from an 80 kilogram man who is just going to get up and jump down on the seat, because that's going to require more. So, and kids would do that in the airplane. And so all these have to be designed, have to be taken account in the design of the internal structure of the airplane. The passenger comfort is very important, but as you design that, remember that the floor of the airplane that the passenger is working on is actually half of the airplane, more or less, maybe a little bit more than half. That's to the bottom. But under that, there are some other things like the landing gear, the luggage, and just some other wiring devices. In a way, it's just like the wires and the pipes that are passed on the floor of the car. These are on the floor below where we walk all over the airplane. Below that portion, that's where these are. So the floor has to be designed for strength so that there's no case of a collapsed floor as the passenger is going to the airplane. So these are necessary parts. The landing gear enclosure, if it's a plane with a landing gear that folds, it's the fuselage, the underbelly of the airplane has to be designed to be able to enclose the landing gear and cover it adequately. Some airplanes don't have the landing gear folding up, they have a standing, so it has to be strong enough to hold the landing gear as it flies through against the wind, which can create a lot of aerodynamic drag. And again, of course, there's a passenger compartment in the aircraft that we have talked about, and these have to be taken into account also. There's a catering compartment, there's a toilet, the cockpit, like we've said before, is part of the fuselage. So there's a lot of things in the fuselage, and so it has to be designed very structurally. It's actually, sometimes you have structural engineers doing the work of the design of the many times actually, not just sometimes, of doing the work of the design of the airplane, because it's a structure in motion, and it needs to maintain a structural integrity. So as you can see, there's a lot to talk about in the different components of the aircraft. Just talking about the fuselage alone, you see the importance of the different components, and therefore the need to strengthen those particular areas. You can't apply that strength in all the parts. It would be a waste of work and unnecessary structural strength throughout. You want to optimize it, but still you want to make this device adequate. So these are the different things to pay attention to. Next time you go by an airplane, please think about these things and look at the aircraft probably in a different way than you have looked at it before.